Hey everybody, so today we're going to be coloring Seashell Sarah here. She's a CC Designs image, and when I started my card I always start by picking the stamp first. If I don't feel inspired by the stamp, I'm never going to make the card. And then I went and picked out the paper, and this is Echo Park's Hello Summer paper line, and I started with this piece with the little bubbles on it, the little circles. I couldn't find any wave paper, so I thought, oh, this kind of looks like bubbles, so I'm going to get that. And then I decided on this cute one with the cloud because she's at the beach. So I've already stamped my image on Canson 140 pound watercolor Montval paper, and that can be found at the store if you'd like to try it. I've got my ink palette here, and I've got the inks already in there, and I'm going to use my medium detail water brush to start. And I've already checked it to see if it's wet, so I've squeezed it, and when you squeeze it, the water kind of fills up this little reservoir right here. You can see it run in there. And then I test it on my hand to see if it's damp. I don't want it to be soaking wet, just to feel wet when I wipe it on my hand, not leave a puddle. Okay, so let's get started. Okay, so this time I wanted her to have tan skin, so I'm going to start with tea dye to start coloring her with. So I'm going to grab just a little bit on the end of my brush, and I've got just a little dab there. And I'm going to, let's start down here on her leg this time. So I'm going to go ahead and run where I want it to be darkest first. I'm going to put my ink down there, and I want it to cast a shadow here in between her legs. And then every time my brush leaves the paper, I'm wiping it off on a paper towel. So now that I've put my ink down, my brush has just got water and it's wet, and I'm going to use that water to spread the ink towards the edge of her leg. Like that. And then I'm going to go ahead, because my brush is, I wiped my ink off, so I'm going to go grab some more. So I've got my little dab on there, and I'm going to again start what I want it to be darkest. So I want it to be darkest again down here at the bottom of her leg. So I'm going to go ahead and start here at the back of her fanny and just run my ink down along the edge of her leg, wipe my brush off, and then just use the water in my brush to wipe what I put down up onto her leg. And you can see already that this leg is way lighter than this leg because I had more area to cover to get up there, but that's okay because I'm going to let it dry, and then I'm going to come back and add another layer while after it's dried. So let's go up here and grab her stomach. So I want her hands to her arms here to kind of cast a little bit of a shadow. So I'm going to start with my ink right there underneath of her arm and underneath of her chest. And then I'm going to use my brush, wipe it off, and then use your brush to just pull that ink down here onto her body. Get down here by her belly button. Like that. And then the same for her arm. I'm going to go ahead and start where I want it to be darkest, and I want it to be darkest over here where the shell is kind of casting a shadow, and underneath where her hand is holding it. And then wipe your brush off, and then come back with just water and pull that ink out to her arm. And if I had put down a really lot of ink and I started pulling it out and I got out here, let's say about halfway, and it was still seemed pretty dark, I would wipe my ink off my brush and then start over with just water so I could pull it from there. Because sometimes I get more ink on my brush than other times. Okay, and then let's do right here, and she's going to cast a little bit of a shadow right there. I'm going to say her back's going to have a little bit on there. So let's put a little bit of ink there and then use that ink to fill in the rest of her arm. Remember, this is just your first layer, so you can, it's going to look a little blotchy, but that's okay, because we're going to go back after it dries and we're going to add a little bit more on there. And since I didn't do down here on this, her underneath of her foot, I'm going to go ahead and add that now since that top leg, part of her leg is dried. Okay, let's go get her face, start her face. And so I want her face to be darkest over here where the shell is, and I'm going to have the light kind of shine on her from this direction. So I'm going to start, let me turn her around here. I'm going to start by putting my ink down on this side of her face, like this, and then I'm going to wipe my excess ink off my brush, and then I'm just going to pull that ink into the middle of her face. I'm going to pull it as far over as I can, like that. And then I'm going to do the other side. I'm going to go ahead and get just a little bit on this side, get a little bit on her ear, and run some down her jawline there. Because her face would curve over, so you want it to cast just a little bit of a shadow on this side too, so it appears that it's rolling. Okay, that looks pretty good for our first coat. So let's go down here, since we've worked on our whole image, let's go back down to her bottom down here and work on her legs again. So, and also check your brush. Make sure you still have, it's still damp. If not, give it a little squeeze so that you can reload the water in there. Sometimes after a long time of, depending on how long it takes you to color the image, you'll have to squeeze it a little bit in between, because it tends to dry out. See if I can get a little bit more of her leg tanned up here. You just want to layer it on a little bit at a time, and then you can always go back and add some more. Sometimes I color and I'll add, you know, 5 or 6 layers depending on how much shading I want on there. But you just have to be patient and let it dry in between each time. Got outside the lines there a little bit. Grab my water and just wipe that up. This side of her arm. Okay, let's darken up her face just a little bit more. Didn't get quite enough color on there to give it much of a shadow on this side. That looks better. And then I'm also going to make her hair right up here. I'm going to give that a little bit of a shadow right here, because her hair is falling on her forehead, so it's going to cast a little bit of a shadow on there. And I may come back here after that coat's dry and add just a little bit more. Okay, and let's do this side of her face again real quick. Just pull that ink over here towards her mouth. There, her face looks pretty good. I think I'll go down here and add just a little bit more to her leg down here, her bigger leg. And maybe just a little bit more to her stomach too. She likes to lay out in the sun, so she's got a tan. Maybe put a little bit right here where her arm is, because that's going to cast a little bit of a shadow right here. Alright, so to add a little bit of a pink tint to her skin, I'm going to go ahead and mix a couple of colors. So I'm going to get a little bit of my tea dye on the end of my brush. So I'm going to dip it right in there like that. And then I've got a piece of laminated paper here. I'm just going to put that right here on top of that. So I covered up my paper towel. So I'm going to get my paper towel and I'm going to wipe all that excess ink right off my brush. So all I have is water again. And then I'm going to go up here and I'm going to pick up a little bit of Tattered Rose on my brush. So I've got that little bit on there. And I'm just going to swirl it into my mix here. And that's still looking a little brown to me, so I'm going to wipe my brush off. So I only have water on it again before I dip it. I'm going to grab a little bit more of my tea dye. And I'm just going to swirl that in there just a little bit. So I've ended up with this little patch of mixed ink. And we're going to use that to give her a suntan. Okay, so I'm going to take a little bit of my mixed ink and I'm going to add it. I want it to appear that her leg, she's been sitting out in the sun for a while, so the top of her leg here is going to have a little bit of a pink cast. So I'm just going to put that on there from the top down and just rub that right on. Same thing with this side. I'm going to go over here and I'm going to put it right on top of her leg. And then just pull that down as far as it'll go. And that'll just give it a little bit of a pink cast on there, so it looks like she's been out in the sun all day. I'm going to do the same thing for her arms. So I'm going to put a little bit here on the top of her forearm. And a little bit on the top of this forearm. And then I'm going to pinken up her little cheeks just a little bit. So I'm taking my mixed color and I'm just going to go over here and add a little bit of pink onto the side of her face. And then I'm going to kind of wipe my brush off and then I'm just going to kind of dab it a little bit and spread it out towards her mouth on that side. And I'm going to do the same thing with this side. I'm going to start here underneath of her eye and bring a little bit of pink down along her cheek. And I may do that a couple times. It just depends on, I'm going to let it dry and then I'll come back. But I want to add a little bit more pink tone to her leg down here. So I'm going to go down and put just a little bit on top of her second leg. And then I'm going to wipe my excess off and use water to just wipe this down further onto her leg. That way it just looks like she's been sitting out in the sun just a little bit too long. And should maybe go in. That would, for me, that would be about, 5 minutes. Like that. Well, let's go up here and add a little bit more to her cheeks again. I want them to be pink, a little bit pinker. She's happy. She's been out in the sun and she's all rosy. Alright, so I've given that a couple of minutes to dry all the way, and now we're going to go up here and we're going to work on her hair. And so for her hair, I'm going to start out with scattered straw. I'm going to grab a little bit of that, and I'm going to lay it down where I want it to be the darkest, and I want it to be the darkest right here underneath of her hairline first. So I'm going to run my brush down along her hair, wipe off your excess when you get to the bottom, and then just use the water to pull that ink out to the side. Okay, and so my brush is picking up quite a bit of water, but I haven't made it to the edge yet, so I'm going to wipe my brush off because I want it to be pretty light out here at the edge. I don't want it to be this bright yellow when I get to the edge of her stamped image. I want it to look like the sun is falling on the outside out here. Okay, so like that. And then I'm going to grab a little bit more. And I want it to be dark right here where it rolls over onto her bangs. So I'm going to go ahead and start with my ink along this line. That. And then use just water. I've wiped my brush off and use just water to pull this up towards the middle. And then I'm going to do the same thing from the top down. So I'm going to grab a little bit more ink on my brush. And I'm going to put just a little bit up here in the little teepee of her, looks like a little triangle top there, and then wipe my brush off and then just use the ink that I put there to kind of smooth it down to meet the ink that's coming from the bottom. Maybe get a little bit over here. So it's a little bit darker up here at the top and right here along the edge than it is right here in the middle. I'm going to grab a little bit and let's add some over here. So again, I'm going to put a little bit right here where her hair would cast a shadow and down the side of her face. And then wipe my brush off. And then just use water to wipe that out towards the edge. Okay, so I've given that a couple of minutes to dry, and now I'm going to add my shadows on top of that. So for my shadows, I'm going to use Scattered Straw and Rusty Hinge mix. So just like we did with her skin, I put down a little bit of my Scattered Straw onto my my laminated sheet, and then I added a little dab of Rusty Hinge, and I mixed it up until I thought that was the color I wanted. So I'm going to grab a little bit of that mixed color, and I'm going to go down here and add a little bit to her hair. So I'm going to start where I want it to be darkest. So I want it to be dark underneath of her hairline right here next to her body. And put a little bit of my color there, wipe my excess off, and then just use water to pull this out away from that line. I'm just going to let it fade over here on the outside. So it gives it a nice little shadow there next to her face and her body. Okay, so I'm going to do the same thing up here for her. I'm going to again lay it down right here next to her face, like I did the first time. And then I'm going to use my brush with just water to feather that line away. And let's add a little bit up here on the back of her head. Let's give her a little bit more of a shadow over here. So see how it's got this nice shadow on the back, so it looks like the sun's kind of shining down right up here like this, but it's a little bit darker when it curves around over here. And let's add a little bit on this side. And because I didn't get a little curly Q very dark, I'm going to add just a little bit along the edge right there. And then just wipe that up just a little bit more. You can also do, if you want to add a second coat to even darken it up, maybe add just a touch more of your Rusty Hinge into your mixed paint, and that will darken it up just a little bit. So when you come back again, this time your layer will just be a little bit darker than the first time. that. She looks pretty good. I'm liking that. Okay, so let's go work on her mouth. And the inside of her mouth is Spun Sugar. So that's not going to be a hard one. We'll just grab a little bit of Spun Sugar on our brush and go in here and color the inside of her mouth. Like that. Alright, and for her eye, I've colored it with Walnut Stain. So I'm going to grab just a little dab of Walnut Stain on my brush. And remember, it's really dark, so you just need a little bit. So I've got my little bitty bit on the end of my brush. And I'm going to brush just a little bit up here at the top. Same with this side. And then I'm going to wipe that excess brush ink off my brush, and I'm just going to use water to fill it in the rest of her eye. Okay, so you've let that dry, so let's go do her tongue. And for her tongue, I'm going to start with worn lipstick. So I'm going to grab a little bit of that on the end of my brush. And I'm just going to lay down a little dab here along the back of her tongue, and then wipe my brush off, and then use that little bit to spread it out towards the end. So it's going to be pretty light out here at the end, but that's okay because we're going to come back in a minute and add a little bit of shadows. So while that's drying, let's go up here and do a little bit more work on her eye. So I'm going to get a little bit more Walnut Stain on my brush. And again, I'm going to lay it down up here at the top where I think her pupil would be. Same for on this side. And then I'm just going to use water to lightly bring it, soften that little line and maybe bring it down to the bottom there. Like that. Okay, and while that was drying, I went ahead and to give her tongue a little bit more shading, I went ahead and mixed up a little bit of my worn lipstick and Festive Berries. You don't have to do that. You could also, if you don't have Festive Berries because it's a new one, you could do worn lipstick and maybe just a little bitty drop of black soot, but just a little bit. And then I would maybe try it onto a piece of scratch paper before putting it on her mouth. So I'm going to again start at the back and add your color and then bring it out here towards the end. Like that. Okay, and I'm going to go up here and I'm going to add another little, I'm kind of liking how this eye is darker up here at the top, but I want to add just a little bit more color up here to this one, so I'm going to grab some more Walnut Stain. And just add a little bit more to this side. Darken that pupil up at the top there just a little bit more. And then I also want to darken her tongue up. I didn't like how light that is still in the back, so I'm going to grab a little bit more of my mixed paint and add some more in the back. And then just lightly brush it out until we get to the end here. There, that looks pretty good. I like that.